Hey adapters, I'm Doug Parsons. I'm a partner at Simpatico Studios where we live stream conversations about complex business and social challenges with professionals like yourself who are working on the same issues. Our shows are live streamed in front of a global audience of your professional peers on simpatico.tv. I'm building a new type of online community for professionals like yourself on the Climate Adaptation channel. If you're a regular listener of my America Adapts podcast, I think you'll find that we're taking our conversations about important problems, policies, and solutions to the next level here. And if you're interested in being a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And now join us for this latest episode. Hey adapters, welcome back. Today our guest is Dr. Susanne Moser. Susie is an independent researcher and consultant who focuses on climate change adaptation, science policy interactions, climate communication, and psychosocial resilience in the face of traumatic and transformative challenges associated with climate change. Susie will introduce us to the Adaptive Mind Project and shares the importance of building psychosocial resilience in the climate workforce. She describes the psychosocial stresses that ongoing change, traumatic experiences, and transformative challenges associated with the climate crisis have on those working in the field. Hey, Susie, welcome to the show.
Hey there, it's great to be here.
Well, a familiar face. It's not always the case. And so I know you, Susie, from a previous life. And so it's great to have you on.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here, and thanks for having me.
All right, I'm checking in with folks first, and COVID. How's it impacting what's going on with you? How's it impacting your work and everything?
You know, it's not all that different. I work out of my office here at home, and I still do. The only thing that's changed is I'm not traveling as much. So I have been in the same time zone now for, 8 months. It's unbelievable. So for the most part, I'm actually in a good shape, and I still have work. So quite privileged and grateful for that.
All right, we're going to talk about the adaptive mind, but as I was putting these questions together, I thought, I rarely get to ask this question. I'd love to hear your answer. What is an adaptation professional?
Well, I guess it comes in all kinds of flavors, but in my understanding, an adaptation professional is someone who is focused on preparing for and managing the risks of climate change. In whatever field, whether you're in engineering and you're beginning to change how you build bridges, or whether you're in public health and you're trying to figure out how to deal with COVID and climate crises and disaster preparedness at the same time. That to me is someone who is really thinking forward, making decisions with an eye to the climate future.
Okay, so what do you do specifically? You're a consultant, but what are the different areas that you're working in?
Yeah, so I've been working on adaptation since, my God, before that ever became a word. In the early 1990s, I started, there were maybe a dozen or so at that point in the United States. I've been doing research for the longest part of my career, trying to understand what are communities, states, federal agencies doing to prepare for climate change, and what gets in the way, where should we focus? How do we integrate equity and those kinds of considerations? So that's been one big area of my work. And, interestingly enough, you need a lot of science to do that, right? You need a lot of technical expertise. Technical experts are not trained in how to interact with the world of practice. And so I've been trying to understand that better and try to help ease that interaction, if you will, understand what gets in the way and help people and train people in how to do that. And the sort of related issue, and that was kind of handed to me somewhere early on in my career, was how do you talk about this climate change issue? It's so challenging, right? We're all battling over, how do we get the science across so that people get their butts off the couch, but also how do we deal with contrarians? How do we deal with people being in despair and numb and just check out? It's that kind of challenge. And with adaptation, it's a particular challenge because, for a long time, people thought, when we start talking about adaptation, we must have obviously given up on mitigation, which is absolutely not the case, but there's that perception. And it's such a dark outlook, think about looking at sea level rise curves and what that means in your community, wherever you live, whether it's Norfolk or Charleston or, Tijuana River. It's just daunting, right? And so engaging people in that kind of context is really difficult, and it gets you very quickly to the kinds of things we're talking about, both for the people who work on this daily, but also for the communities that live in the face of climate change impacts.
Maybe you've already done this, but it occurs to me, I've been doing adaptation since like 2003, and I feel like an old timer. You're early 90s. I mean, you're just, and
ancient. Thank you.
That was the correct word there. But the evolution of an adaptation professional, have you ever written about this? Because I found when I was doing the work that I was doing, I was in wildlife conservation, and I felt like that part of that sector was one of the early adopters of adaptation, whereas other sectors, urban planning, weren't necessarily even doing it. Have you ever kind of looked at how it's sort of evolved? Have you thought about writing about that? Because I would love to read something like that.
I've never written about it, but I've thought about it a lot, because it just feels like I need to reinvent myself about every 5 years in terms of just what we're doing. I remember the days when it was all new and chic to do a social vulnerability assessment. Before we had sort of just looked at impacts, or maybe we had looked at species, but we had not really looked at what does it mean for people, and does it mean the same for all kinds of people? And so, that's how we got into how equity and long-standing legacies of disadvantaging, or just for the fact that, some are 2 years old, 20 years old, and 92 years old, and the differences that, say, heat extreme makes for people like that. So it was all new when I started. That was like, I was on the front lines of that. And now that's like, old hat in some ways. We've standardized that, and we're asking much deeper questions about what shall we do about that, those kinds of social vulnerabilities and different differential social vulnerabilities. But it's also, for the longest time, we were very descriptive in like, this is what's happening. This is how people think about it. And now we're much more asked to, well, help me solve this problem here. What are we going to do about it? So yeah, there's all these institutional barriers. How do we change governance? How do we change finance? So people are really shifting. And when I went to graduate school as a geographer, I never heard about finance. That was not part of it. Now, if you want to talk adaptation, you got to talk finance. Just, one example. Doesn't mean everybody can do it, but you kind of have to be, at least have some understanding that this is a really big issue for realizing adaptation on the ground.
I find when I'm talking to people outside of my orbit of climate change, I sort of describe, there's mitigation, there's adaptation. And do you find, and I want, this is hopefully pivots into the adaptive mind a bit, but that I find that people on the mitigation side seem to be more depressed than people on the adaptation side, and, they're dealing with like the temperature rise and carbon emissions. Are we going to get these under control? Whereas, I don't know, maybe there's more diverse people in the adaptation space. Do you encounter that, or do you work with both sides of that?
I don't have a good basis to judge that, other than working with people who work in the climate movement, so activists. I haven't recently spoken to people who work on, the mitigation side. I mean, I can understand. I mean, if you think about the policy landscape in the U.S. and since, the Obama administration to the Trump administration, how many things you can truly destroy in 4 years has been remarkable. And seeing all that hard work undermined, I mean, it was, a heavy lift to get Obama to where he was. And that wasn't particularly progressive or far, right? Not right. Far anyway, for most of us that they're thinking about this. But then all of that has just had the knees taken out from under it, so I can see why they're, depressed, right? But we all have to realize we're in it for the long haul. And quite frankly, if adaptation professionals aren't depressed, then they haven't looked deeply enough, quite frankly, at what's coming. I work a lot on coastal adaptation. I don't know, did you hear that just a couple of days ago? There was this new study out on that basically the headline was something like, the Greenland is past the point of no return. So, you're in the news business and you didn't even hear that particular headline. It's a major Earth tipping point that we just crossed over. And we're just like, it's not even on the third page of a newspaper. It's nowhere near. It's unbelievable. What that means, right, is 20 feet of sea level rise over several hundred, possibly up to 1,000 years. Doesn't matter. Over that time frame, we have to move somewhere between 10 and 50% of the world population from where they live right now.
It's
It's the largest transformation this world has ever seen, right? So if you're a coastal manager and if you're, you probably are only thinking, well, I'm only going to be here for another 15 years before I retire or something like that, right? That's probably that kind of way out thinking is probably what keeps them from not being completely depressed.
I think the fact that I grew up and I'm from Florida has created this sort of morbid sense of it all, like, managed retreat. And I'm like, I hate all the development on coastal Florida. And I'm like, those people got it coming. It's coming, getting rid of on along the coast. And I don't want natural systems impacted, but part of it's just like, you shouldn't keep building. And so the notion of that something bigger than them is going to finally stop development because they're not thinking. So that's a little bit morbid. And on that note, being a little bit morbid, the people that you're working with, and I get this question, and I don't know quite how to answer it, but how do you get up in the morning based on you're in the field of climate change, in the field of adaptation? I'm sure you get a variation of that question. How do you answer that?
It's a very strange tension in which I feel like I live and we all have to learn to live. And that is, on the one hand, recognizing and accepting and grappling with the fact that we have missed the boat in a very large number of ways. And there's going to be severe impacts and severe suffering for way too many people. And I can get up. This morning was a good example. It was, one of the first cooler late summer mornings turning into fall. It was gloriously beautiful. And those two things are true at the very same time, right? So holding that tension of opposites in my mind is, I think of it almost like there's a whole number of tensions like that. I think of it almost like a string. And if I put them all together, it's a net and I just can't fall in because, I'm held up by the tension between all these opposites. It's really helpful to me to think of it as, it's yes, this and this. And if I am not anchored in what's beautiful and what's sustaining me personally in my life, my family, my partner, my cat, whatever, my garden, then I just can't get up. And I think we need to learn how to anchor ourselves and in that way cope and build our strengths, build our internal resilience so that we can do what is really, truly hard work on every front of this.
Okay, on that note, what is the Adaptive Mind Project?
Well, it's basically trying to figure out, trying to help those who work on the front lines of climate change to do exactly that, to basically, dig into their own skills, propensities, and teach them some skills about how to care for themselves while being in the middle of the largest human transformation and the biggest challenges we've ever faced. And that is not just climate, right? Right now we're living through this very interesting coalescing of pandemics, right? With an S, plural, whether that's climate and COVID and, this awareness finally of, racist violence that has colored this country and many other countries in the world, and the health, uneven health impacts, what it does even think about it on a gender lens, like who is asked right now to take care of children and elders while they're working full time and doing all the rest of it, right? It's really challenging. I just recently saw an article about this is America's first female recession because they're leaving the workforce more than the rest of them. So, to me, it's like all these challenges together shows us what a systemic problem this is that we're in. And, how do you handle this? We've talked more about mental health in the COVID crisis than I've ever heard my entire life on, in public media, right? And I've been trying to get people to pay attention to, and this is the kind of stress that adaptation professionals and as you said, mitigation professionals apparently face too. It's an unbelievable stress to constantly look, the end of the world in the face. That's your day job. And get up again, and probably the public is hitting you over the head and the, trolls online are hitting you over the head. And there's barriers left and right in the way of you actually accomplishing what you want to do, which is help your communities. It's hard to do that. So how do we support these people? I think of it as taking care of those who take care of us.
So with the adaptive mind, though, I've seen some of the material that you've put out, and I've been a session you led at the National Adaptation Fund. I think that was related to the adaptive mind, that big session you did, I think, with Emily Wasley. What's the process? You have some partners that you're working with, but is it? I can't imagine even where you get started. Does someone find you and say, I'm having these issues, or are you working with organizations? What's the process?
Yeah, well, it started that way. I had colleagues that I've been working with for years come to me, and they happen to know I like to talk about this internal stuff too. I'm not just a techie, and so they just shared with me how hard it is to how depressed they are, how despairing they are, despite the fact of having major responsibility for a big city. So it started from there, and then I pulled together a bunch of colleagues who are interested in the same thing, but really what we started to do is conduct a survey with different networks of people working in precisely these kinds of fields. So, for example, Sea Grant Extension, or the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, the American Society for Adaptation Professionals, or the National Estuarine Research Reserve System. These are just a few examples of the networks we're working with. We're working also with some BIPOC networks of resilience professionals. And the point of it is to just get a first sense of, is there a problem here? I mean, is this just a few people, my friends who come to talk to me, or is this actually widespread? What we found is that the rate of burnout is 80% at the moment. Think about that. 4 out of 5 people are like done. They maybe have to stay in their jobs because that's, how they earn their living, but they're fried. And, we all know from lots of psychological and medical studies that people who are burnt out are less effective. They're cranky. They can't they're not as productive. So it's actually an economic issue, if you will. It's certainly an HR issue. And it's certainly, poor people are just kind of a suffering workforce. We recognize that problems for people who work in social change issues and social sector, social services, in the humanitarian, or even for first responders. We acknowledge it, firefighters and people who go into whatever the ruins of 9/11 kind of thing. We've acknowledged that they have a psychological stresses from that. We have not acknowledged yet for people who look at climate change day in and day out. And that's what we're trying to do. So we established that there is a problem. Now we're looking for funding to, basically understand what do different types of sciences have to say about that. We're trying to integrate that. We're going to try to figure out, what part of that adaptive mind is trainable, and then develop some training materials, resources, tools, pilot that, adjust it based on feedback, and follow people over time to kind of see, does that training, do those skills that we're trying to build, the resources we provide, does it help? Or what do we need, what more is needed? So we get a both longitudinal sense of psychosocial resilience, but we're also really staying adapted or adaptive in our own approach to the project. And because I can imagine, as things get tougher, the skills people need, the support people need will change over time. And at the same time, we're trying to build peer support networks and institutional support. And it's absolutely essential that the people at the top of these agencies and organizations actually get behind this. They have to understand that, it's being an adaptation professional is not just that you understand finance and that you understand GIS and that you understand, how to do planning effectively, or scenario analysis or vulnerability analysis. You actually have to have that inner capacity to keep going every day and for the long haul. And, that's the case we're trying to make by doing this work.
You obviously know a lot of groups doing adaptation. Has anyone sort of stepped up and said, we want to work with you? I mean, it sounds like you're early stages here, but if someone did want to engage with you as a small organization, are you at the stage where you actually have prescriptive recommendations that you would give, or are you still kind of gathering?
Not yet. No, not yet. We're in the fundraising, period. We've done a lot of, this is a good example of, there is such a hunger for this. It's really fascinating to me. We've been going around talking about this at conferences, at workshops, at, annual meetings of these different networks and organizations. And it's like, oh yeah, please bring it on, like yesterday, right? They all want it. We haven't gotten the funding yet because for some reason, and it's quite beyond my really comprehending this, but there are lots of philanthropic funders and agencies that have invested in building the adaptation field, and they don't want to fund this type of capacity building. And I don't quite understand. It's maybe because, talking about despair and grief and anxiety and whatever else people experience, maybe that's too soft or too taboo, or I don't know what it is. But, quite frankly, it is resulting leaving the field. We already have evidence of that. We have people who said, my colleagues are leaving the field because they don't want to do this work every day in and day out. It's too hard, psychologically too hard, not technically. So, I think everyone has a stake in this, actually. I think that, this little tagline of taking care of who's taking care of us. Like, imagine all the doctors you ever go to, all the teachers you expect your children to teach just disappeared, right? I mean, all of a sudden, do your life, right? Without those people who provide essential services to you, and people who think about how do we design our cities in a way that they're not falling apart when there's a pandemic, or when there's a, climate disaster, or, if we have to move back from the coast or from a burning area. I mean, you want that. And think about when Paradise, California burned. The mayor and every single person on city council and every staff in that city lost their homes. We want those people to function as well as they did the day before the fire, right? That's insane to expect that. And maybe people have some tolerance of that for like the first week. After that, they want like responses, right? So it's really trying to get those people the necessary support and the skill building. I think it's a leadership skill set that we should expect of people. And that's what we're trying to start building.
All right, I've got some questions from the community chat I want to ask you. And then we're getting toward the end of our episode here. From Ken, is there a significant difference in burnout in professionals in municipalities/states that are led by climate denying administrations versus a state like California, where there is a strong statewide political buy-in and at least a desire to make investments and change policies? So are people who believe in climate change more likely to burn out from it, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When we did this initial survey to just understand it, there were certainly that issue of, the challenges of communicating and engaging people, especially when they're just like putting blocks in your ways, is really, it just makes it that much more frustrating, right? So you can totally imagine. I don't think we have pulled that out from the data yet to kind of, prove that statistically, but intuitively that makes a lot of sense to me, that if you have a supportive mayor, if you have a supportive business leadership or whatever, that you're totally, you basically get to go. You have some wind under your wings, whereas, the rest of it is just beating you down on top of everything being hard to begin with. So I don't know that statistically, but I'm pretty certain that that's the case. People have said so in their write-in messages too.
Okay, a question from Mike is, what can we, and he's meaning us as media professionals, do to raise more awareness of the well-being of adaptation professionals? Although interviewing people like you, but I guess what else can we be doing?
Well, I think talking about it, it's been interesting in the last 2 years. Incredible uptick of articles about mental health impacts, about climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, climate grief, that stuff. It's sort of out there now as a general theme. And, when you talk to mental health professionals, they will tell you that the wave of mental health crisis that they're expecting because of climate change is going to be tsunami. It's just rising. But we have not honed in on, there's maybe just 5 articles or so, peer-reviewed articles that I've seen that actually talk about what it's like for the people who work on climate change day in and day out. I've talked, just said to you, I've been working on adaptation since the early 90s, on climate change since the 80s. So, I'm 40 years in, if you will, of talking. There is not a day I can avoid it, right? This is my chosen field. And the news has only gotten worse since then. I have days when it knocks the knees right out from under me. And then I go and rejuvenate in the things that bring me joy to kind of go back. And I've done waves and waves of grief. So portraying that, talking about that, helping people understand what it means to lose your doctors, to lose your educators, to lose your planners. Those are the kinds of things that I guess as media professionals would be an interesting, at least, if not really essential, in my humble opinion.
Susie, we're already at the end of this episode. There's many more conversations I want to have with you, and so I definitely want you to come back. But just it's sort of wrapping this up. What's next with you around the adaptive mind, and if people want to learn more about it, what should they do?
Well, so getting in touch with me is the easiest way because we don't have yet the resources to build a website and whatever. But I have been asked so many times, do you have already some resources? I pulled some stuff together. If people are interested in that, just send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to share it. I have some of that on my website. What's next for the project? Well, we're really trying to get some funding. If anybody has ideas, I'd love to hear about it. And, there's some great opportunities out there. And as soon as we get money in the bank, we're rolling. I mean, we've done so much work and mostly pro bono right now. And it's fascinating and the need is huge. So I just want to keep figuring out how to do it.
Well, it's a treat talking to you, and I just want to throw out, I had mentioned before that, Simpatico is this emerging platform. We're talking to adaptation professionals. I mean, just put in your head, a show, the Adaptive Mind. Every 2 weeks, you're able to kind of come on and talk about these things, or we do a panel. We recreate what you did at that National Adaptation Forum. Not necessarily money in your pocket, but we have this as a platform for you to do that. And so we'd love to continue to have that conversation with you, to use this, let this be a resource for you.
It's part of the culture change. I'm realizing more and more, we have to change the culture in which we can talk about these things, right? I mean, think about, this is why, you don't have technical experts show up at whatever climate grief community meetings, because they feel like they have to be these technical experts and it undermines their credibility if they talk about it. But is going on in all their minds and hearts. And so having these kinds of having these spaces where we can do that, it's absolutely essential. And thank you for that opportunity. I'm happy to figure out how to make that work.
We're going to make it work. We will. This will be great. I'm going to let just hold on. We're going to just go into a just chatting section, but I want to close out the episode. But thanks again for Susie for coming on.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So just one sec.